My name's Jeremy McLaughlin. I'm a payments fintech attorney at K&L Gates in our San Francisco office. So I advise a lot of companies in the digital asset space, including those in the NFT space. My particular focus oftentimes is on money transmission and AML compliance with FinCEN.
Hi, my name is Cohen. I'm a co-founder of DLX Law. We're a law firm that focuses
Closer, just hold it closer.
Focuses on the blockchain and digital asset space, and we're delighted to be here.
My name is Vandana Taxali. I'm an intellectual property, entertainment, and art lawyer. I also have a platform called Artcryption, which protects art assets on the blockchain, including IP enforcement and maintenance.
Hi, folks. I'm Steve Wink. I'm a partner at Latham & Watkins here in New York. I'm co-chair of our global blockchain and cryptocurrency task force, and also my background was as a securities regulatory lawyer.
All right, thanks. So I think the theme of our panel is going to try to be kind of, all right, you're playing in the NFT space, so what are the kind of big areas of law you have to think about? How do they exist now? Where do we think they're going to go in the future? We're obviously not going to be able to cover every area of law that would touch you, but I think the kind of key ones in your space. So for instance, money transmission laws, as a lot of you know, are kind of the bane of the existence of a lot of small companies because it's a 50 state by state analysis. I think out of all the digital asset companies that I advise, the NFT space worries me the least oftentimes. You usually trigger money transmissions by the receipt of money or monetary value and then sending it onward. So the big questions, I think, as you're developing your platforms and in this space is there some way that your NFT could be deemed some sort of monetary value? Could it be used as a medium of exchange? Is it a payment instrument in some way? But then, as your lawyer and your friend advising you, they would also look. There are also many exemptions from these laws that the NFTs often benefit from, like kind of exemptions for loyalty points and other things like that. I think one of the key areas that we all hear about in this is security. Is this a security token? So Steve, I'm going to let you take it away with that.
Sure. So a couple of years ago, I think the blockchain crypto space had this onslaught from the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission here in the U.S., as everything they'd ever seen, every token they'd ever seen was a security. Fortunately, they backed off on that position a little bit, and I think there's a little more clarity, although we certainly need a lot more. But what they were really talking about is this notion that if a security like a share of stock represents an investment of money in an enterprise, and you're banking on the efforts of management of that enterprise to create the value in your investment, well, that's a security. That's traditionally what a share of stock represents. So there's this Howey test that I'm sure folks have heard about, that talks about that very sort of notion. It talks about the effort of others being central to the creation of that profit. And an NFT really doesn't fall into that sort of category, because the idea is that an NFT is something that's, it's created and sold, this unique thing. There's nothing really more that needs to be done to develop that thing to make it valuable to you in your original purchase of it. So as a result, it shouldn't be security. If there's absent other sorts of activities that could go on to around it potentially. But that's the idea.
Thanks. Louis, do you have anything to add?
No, I thought that was great. I think the only point I'd pick up between Jeremy, your point, and Steve's is that this is a relatively lower risk regulatory area, but in some ways that can actually be more dangerous because there's a tendency sometimes to think it's a no risk area, and there's definitely a difference between a low risk and no risk, and it's still important if you're working on a project to consult with someone who's familiar with these issues and just make sure. It's like going to the doctor when you're 28 and healthy. You still want someone to poke around all the different parts and just make sure there's not something concerning there. That's what I'd say.
Yeah.
And if I could just jump in, there's also the other concern that you can take something that isn't a security, like a crypto kitty, but transform it or sell it like it's a security. If there's some activity that you're doing to promote that value, that it can increase. Now, if the item, the NFT, increases in value due to broad market forces, not the activities of a particular enterprise, different story. That shouldn't make it a security. But so that's where you have the potential for transforming something into a security. And also, you may have heard, it can also go the reverse way. So if something's decentralized, maybe starts out more looking like, the activities of this enterprise are central to its value. It can be, eventually decentralized enough, like Bitcoin or Ethereum, so that, it's accepted that it's no longer a security.
Yeah, and following up on what you said about how this can be, there's an important difference, right, between no risk and low risk. And I think oftentimes, whether you're in the NFT space or kind of just cryptocurrency space or any sort of new emerging technology, a lot of it is that regulators are kind of just behind in even understanding what it is. And so maybe as something morphs, then it's on their radar screen, and now suddenly they're looking at it. That's why I think it is a good, and this is not self-promotion, but it is a good idea to consult just with someone that knows the space to make sure it doesn't morph into that. But I think that also speaks to how NFTs, I think because they're this new kind of digital asset that regulators haven't thought about, can also shape the law in certain ways. And I think that's where I want to bring in Vandana. I think one of the, at least I've been to several conferences like this where we hear a lot about kind of money transmission and securities implications, but the implications are potential implications for kind of IP protection and use of NFTs. I think is fascinating. So Vandana, your thoughts?
Yeah, so I'm an intellectual property lawyer, and NFTs are basically going to disrupt and change IP law. And I think that's very exciting for all of us. I think what we're going to be seeing is a lot more creators being able to protect their creations, and as a result, we're going to see more creativity. The reason being is that, when you go to think about the US Copyright Office, it's expensive to, each time you create something, to have to register it. And then on top of that, it takes like 8 months to get a registration. And in order to litigate, you need a copyright registration. It's different in Canada, you don't need that, but it's still a stumbling block for many creators and people creating unique assets. So the blockchain having this characteristics of being permanent, immutable, and having a date and time stamp, you can now protect your creations on the blockchain. And I think that the law will eventually change, and we're already seeing it right now. So we're seeing the courts recognize the blockchain as having, using it as evidence that's been placed on the blockchain. So we have Arizona, who's passed a law. We've got Nevada looking at information recorded on the blockchain as being evidence. So I think it's a matter of time, and I think it's very exciting. And I think this brings like a whole host of new things sort of coming to the forefront. And I think we've seen it all day today with people talking about digital assets and digital collectibles. Like, yes, it's easy to take a physical object and know to protect it, but now we have this whole new realm with digital assets and being able to protect them and creating sort of a new monetization scheme that I think is very exciting, that artists, for example, have never been able to monetize. We had Web 2.0 with the internet, we see a lot of sharing of information and content and copyright protected works, and people just copying it, whether it's artwork or music or a film or a TV. And now we've got Web 3.0 with blockchain, where now we're seeing that sort of, solving those issues of Web 2.0. And that's why NFTs are so exciting, because you can now start looking at IP in a different way, monetizing it, protecting not just the final creation, but the whole process of like the sketches, your drafts, your ideas, because it's so inexpensive and fast to place something on the blockchain. We're also going to see, other exciting things where it's going to be easier to collaborate with other creators, because you're going to be able to kind of, have everyone, easily identifiable as to who created what, and having it identified on the blockchain. Adding smart contracts, managing your licensing programs a lot easier, tracking resale royalties. I mean, the list goes on. I'm probably going on far too much, but you get the gist.
No, you're good. And actually, I'll follow up with you because we were speaking earlier, and I think a good use case that you spoke to me about that was helpful is kind of how NFTs can enable artists and to interact with businesses, and the process is much quicker, and it makes sure there's license. So if you could give that example, kind of like the phone and artwork and different ways they interact.
No, for sure. So for example, Samsung has the Galaxy Store, and Artcryption, my company, is curating art themes. So you can take like a digital work such as this, and prior to blockchain, anyone could just, find it on the internet and throw it up as a wallpaper. But now, with me placing this digital piece of work on the blockchain, I can now give it its own unique identity and be able to monetize it and perhaps have it increase in value and create my own digital art collection. And it's like so exciting how I think it's going to really change things for artists.
Great, thanks. So we have 5 minutes left, so I want to use this for us each to give kind of a two-part, either where you see, relevant to the NFT community, where you see regulation going in a way that will hopefully help, but if you think it's going to hurt, then say that too, help the community. And then if you were a regulator that you could change something to really foster innovation, what would that be?
Well, I would start off, Jeremy, by saying this is an area where we probably don't need a lot of regulatory involvement. So probably the best thing that can happen here is that all the security stuff that Steve talked about keeps everybody's attention, and we can kind of continue. I think even, as you mentioned, in the area of copyright, there may be some progressions that we can do, but there's a lot of things we can do right now. I think one of the things that intrigues me, we didn't touch on micropayments, but that's a fascinating area. When you have digital artworks of one type or another that are unique and scarce, we can actually start to integrate that with micropayments that are practical. So that's very interesting. The other interesting area, maybe folks talked about this earlier, is DeFi and art. And so there's a large area right now of art finance where artworks are financed by lenders. We may have an environment where we could bring DeFi to the art finance, and your artworks are actually monetized in that way. The regulatory issues there are really unknown, because DeFi itself, of course, raises a lot of issues. But I think that we are just beginning to scratch the surface. One other quick thing from a regulatory point of view I would touch on, Jeremy, is wagering laws. There's a lot where we want to have unique NFTs, and a number of folks talked about these, that create engagement with consumers, often through prizes or value adds, and that's fantastic. But I remind folks, particularly here in the United States, we have state-by-state laws around wagering, sweepstakes, lotteries, and all these other things. It can be very obtuse. And so the moment you venture anywhere in that area, make sure you engage with someone who really understands that space, because it's easy to get tripped up, and it is a state-by-state issue.
I predict that we're going to see two things. We're going to see a lot less piracy, because with the blockchain, you can authenticate a work, you can, enforce, you can, with an NFT, you can sort of track where it's been online. So I think that's one very exciting thing. And I think the second thing we're going to see is, I'm on the Standard Council of Canada for blockchain committee. So we're going to see a lot of international standards and having these things more standardized.
Yeah, so you may have heard about Crypto Mom, Commissioner Hester Peirce at the SEC just recently announced a proposal for a safe harbor for tokens generally from the securities laws. Now, long road to get from where it is now to actually adoption of some kind. And actually, Lewis and I had made comments on some earlier drafts of that proposal, and unfortunately, they didn't include some things that would be very helpful. It'd be great, of course, if we could specifically identify, NFT tokens, other things like that fall outside of the securities realm, so you just don't have to worry about it at all. And it would be great if that happens. Right now, the timeline for anything like that is really, could stretch far into the future, and particularly with the uncertainty around the election year this year, and this, who's going to be manning the positions on the commission, put it all up to question. But I do have hope for some more clarity in that area. The securities world, regulatory world, moves extremely slowly, unfortunately, and it's really stifling innovation in this space. So we're hopeful that we have some movement there.
What are your predictions, Jeremy?
Yeah. I mean, my biggest thing that drives me crazy is money transmitter laws. I mean, it keeps me busy, but that's just because they're such a pain, and I see them stifle so many startups, whether it's in the NFT space or crypto or just typical money transmitter space. And as far as crypto goes, the states are all over the map. You have Wyoming on one end and all the way to New York, and then you have states that haven't said anything. So my hope, if I were a regulator, would be more uniformity among those laws. The states are making some effort. I mean, they're slow going, but they are they have this task force, and they have a new model law, both as just a traditional money transmitter law, but also a Virtual Currency Businesses Act. So I hope that just continues to more uniformity for the industry.